everybody, welcome back to the Dear Global Leader podcast, the solo episodes. So we are already the solo episode number 5, and today we'll discuss the backstage of being a global giant and a global leader, and this means execution under pressure. As you may know, if you have succeeded to become an international player or a global player, competition is rude and competition is intense. And sometimes this means that you will have to take some shortcuts and really execute on your playbook or strategy as fast as you can. And unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't go up as planned. And to take this example and talk about the description of today, I will take the example of the Boeing company. Unfortunately, in 2019, March 2019, like one of their plane crashed in Ethiopia. And a few months earlier, another one also crashed in Thailand. So together, 346 people died. And this means that right after, all of the Boeing plane, the type 737 MAX, were grounded globally. And this had a cost of $20 billion to Boeing. And this really shook the trust of the consumer in one of the most iconic company of America. So the episode of today is really about leadership and about execution under pressure. So I need to provide you a bit of context for this analysis. So Boeing and Airbus had 90% of the market share at that time of the global industry of plane manufacturer. And at that time, it was one of the cornerstone plane and product for a lot of airline. But then Airbus launched a new line of plane, and they claimed that they could help the client gain 15 to 20% of fuel, which is a huge gain in OPEX for them. And all lead to, so this was in 2010, and all leads to 2019. So at that time, Airbus has, for this new plane, more than 6,500 orders. And Boeing had, for the same plane, 5,000. So they were really at risks, and they really had to design fast and deliver fast if they didn't want to lose a lot of market share and a lot of their client. And this led to the first pillar of this time not strategy but failure, which is that they decided to not redesign a new plane, but redesign the former planes. So the 737, and they become the 737 MAX. So to save time, they added a bigger engine, and they also fixed some procedure, but they didn't have time to completely train the pilots. And some of this redesign really created some handling issues, and we found out later that this came to the cost of the safety, and even some engineers had sent some email to say that they were not completely sure of the safety of the craft. At that time, the Boeing strategy or the Boeing culture really became, let's go fast and beat Airbus. And this really created a cultural shift, and they lost this trust in safety first for cost and speed optimization. At the end of the day, they didn't beat on patients, and this was really hurting them. And this directly opened up the second pillar of this description, is that they put the financial engineering lenses compared to the first safety engineering lenses, and this drove them to a complete systemic risks, not only a project risks. At that time, they were really pressured towards the commercial speed, and they had to cut on the quality and also especially on the risk control. And for such an industry and such a product where reliability is a top criteria, it was necessarily would have hurt them later. And if we analyze the Porter landscape for them, they of course were under a lot of pressure. In terms of stakeholder, the buying power of their stakeholder were very high. So they were demanding reliability, they were demanding getting it fast, and at the same time they had next best alternative. So they had to really deliver something great fast, and this is why they decided to keep the same base and redesign some parts to adapt to the competition. But if you look at the Supplier, it was also very high, and this is why they also decided to take this big giant, because there is some great contracts to win with the suppliers, and they also play a big part into this decision. But the most important part that came from where came the pressure was actually the competition, and it was really high with Airbus. That was already a big player with a big market share and already had a great order secured, and at the same time the technology was ready. So all in end, Boeing didn't decided on the engineering resiliency and keep the product as safe and reliable, and they bet on the cost and speed. For the last pillar, I wanted that we come back on the competition landscape, because at that time the Airbus strategy was completely different. Of course, in 2019, when the pressure started, we may think that, oh, Airbus was also very fast to deliver, but this was not true. They actually started in 2010 the development, and it was a very long and steady development. They bet on patience, and they were also very transparent on the approval and everything based on regulation. And to catch up, Boeing had to make some decision. But they had the chance to learn from this failure, and this is why I wanted to come back on another series that they did based on this plane, so the 737 Dreamline, and they could figure it out the best balance between innovation, but also quality and security, safety. At the end of the day, this type of industry that reward trust and safety will always reward decades of trust and decade of safety over a fast and speed development or fast time to market. And at the end of the day, Boeing bet on speed and Airbus on patience, and the markets decided, and they pushed really hard Boeing. The conclusion here is that you may want to do things fast and cheap, but at the end of the day, trust is your license to operate in a lot of industry. And when you lose trust, it will cost you billion, and this will be very hard to won it back. So what are the takeaway of this episode? As I just said, trust is one of your main currency. Once lost, complicated to get it back, and at the same time it will cost you enormous amount of money when you lose it. Secondly, speed without governance is a true weakness and a true vulnerability. It's really important. Sometimes we may think that some departments are bottleneck to innovation, such as quality and all of this governance, but this is some of the cornerstone of your offer and the quality of the offer, and you need to keep it. And lastly, cultural shift is dangerous. As you know, culture is also helping people to understand what we do, when we do, is all of the processes, and it really give a clear guideline of some of the values and how we do the processes. So it's really important that your culture protects the value, especially under pressure, because when we'll not have time to think clearly, we need to rely on this culture. So lastly is to say that in business where trust and safety are at stakes, speed will always be bet by resilience. So we arrive at the end of this episode, and what I really love about this, the behind of this crisis analysis, is not about the competition between two planes, but it's really to understand that culture is actually a strategy. and also the big importance of culture in time of pressure. So the question to you is, under pressure, what is the core value or part of your processes or your culture that you want to keep protected in order that the rest of the flow works? So if you had managed under crisis or under pressure, execution within a very tough environment of competition, feel free to share some comments below. And as always, if you like this type of analysis, please encourage me with a good rating on the app. And if it can be triggering or sparking a lot of discussion with your colleagues, feel free to just send them this episode. Feel free to also subscribe. And for the rest, I see you in the next episode. Bye.